Godfather. It's a niche movie buff joke. Thank you. I do want to thank Jerry and also the good folks at the Woody Guthrie Center for hosting this event and all of the talks that we have here at the Woody Guthrie Center. Also the International Folk Alliance and of course Tri-City Collective and the Tulsa Artists Fellowship for supporting things like this. Sure, all of you, right, we're aware of the kind of cultural and political climate that we're in, and having this kind of public discourse and face-to-face discourse is maybe more important now than maybe in more recent years, right? So I would like you guys to please give a warm round of applause for every one of our panelists, and I'll introduce them one at a time. So first we have Naja Amatola Hilton, and she is a lifetime journaler, poet, performer, and blogger, and she's also a public educator for Oklahoma City Public Schools. I almost said university. I'm giving you a promotion. Okay?
I'll take it.
Yeah, so if you could please join us on stage, give a round of applause for that. Next, we have Fitoti Mshahiri, who is a poet, philanthropist, MC, actor. I mean, he's just a renaissance guy of the arts and humanities. He's also a consistent substitute teacher who's always dealing with our kids. Dealing with it, that sounds negative, right? If everybody who's been a sub understands that sense, right? But he's also a artist in the school and works with our kids on many different levels. So please give a round of applause for Fitoti as he comes to the stage. Next, we have Dr. Deborah Gist. She is the superintendent for Tulsa Public Schools, and no pressure for me, my boss's boss's boss. Give a round of applause for Dr. Gist. And then last but certainly not least, we have a current Tulsa Public Schools student, Tiffany Lyons. Give a round of applause for her, please. I want to give an extra shout out to Tiffany too, because I had to find her on Facebook after I've been a teacher, and so that's probably suspect getting a random message from your former teacher. But she was a happy participant. I want to thank all you guys for coming out. I'm going to sit close to you guys so I'm not past that. I know you want to talk first, Tiffany. So like I said, I appreciate everybody coming out today and supporting this conversation that we have. One thing that I wanted to point out is that when we talk about education, whatever your involvement is, we sometimes think about the why or the purpose. And when I was planning for this event and thinking about it, one of my big whys and purpose is sitting on the front row here. I have my son Ethan with me, and I always think about that next generation, right? And the students that we're in the classroom with, because we can talk about philosophies and policy and things like that, but at the end it's rooted in those. But I would like to hear from our panel here, what is y'all's major why? Why education, why the role that you've chosen, and the things that you do?
I guess I'll start, unless Tiffany, you wanted to start on that side.
You can start.
I teach because I had a professor in college who was like, how many black teachers did you have growing up? And I was like, there were a few. I had more than some people had, but I was like, not that many, and none of them were English teachers, and none of them were young and excited. And so she was like, that's probably a role you could fill, and she was right. People had always told me I could be a teacher. I just didn't want to be because of the pay, but I changed my mind.
Nice. Hello, I teach because I recognize the importance of learning and how I enjoy learning new things. And if we can get the children to enjoy learning at an early age, they won't see school as work. They won't see it as a punishment. Well, I gotta go to school. When they see that learning benefits them, then they will yearn to go to school. They'll be glad to go to school. And I'm an advocate for keeping arts in the school.
Yes.
For sure. So I have on my desk at work actually the project that I did at Nimitz Junior High School when I was a student in Tulsa Public Schools called My Career as a Preschool Teacher. And I studied early childhood education and became an early childhood educator, worked with 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, and then in the primary grades in public schools. And so I loved my teachers, and I had grandparents who were teachers, but I just think it was what I was always meant to do. It was why I was put on this earth. It was what I feel called to do. And then it's a very long story about how I became a superintendent. Ethan and I were just talking about that. But I am so grateful, and I feel so fortunate to be home in the city I love, in the school district that educated me, to work with our awesome teachers and our amazing students, and in my hometown. It really is just a huge honor and a big blessing to me.
Not that you're forced or anything to go there, Tiffany.
I guess I'm a student at Tulsa Public Schools because I love school. I love homework. As crazy as that sounds, I love
awesome.
spending hours and hours doing my homework. And I love school, and I plan to go to school for a long time. So.
That's awesome.
See why I reached out to her?
Our best advertising.
Yeah, that's right. I love homework, yeah. Go say that now. Run down the hall saying that. Spread the gospel of that, please, right? So I appreciate you guys answering that and giving some context for why everyone's here, right? And everybody's story is different. Sometimes we think of maybe educators and those in education as like this faceless like mass. It's just the institution, right? The schoolhouse, all teachers, but we all have kind of different perspectives, right? So I like hearing everybody's individual reason for why. When we think about, you guys, several of you kind of touched on the topic of engaging with kids and what we can do to best engage with our students. And one thing and there's several layers to this, and feel free to pick this apart any angle at all. But when we think about what's in the curriculum and what's in the material that we're studying, how important is it for students to see themselves in that? How do they see themselves in that? Do we have any gaps currently? I know that's a broad question, but I love my panel and who's in it, so pick that apart. Now go.
I can start. This is something it's a topic I'm very passionate about. I remember when I was a teacher, and I worked so hard to find materials that demonstrated and reflected the students I taught. And so I would scour libraries and bookstores to find books, to find people throughout history, just to do everything I could to represent my students and for them to see people who looked like them, people who could teach them things that I felt like the materials I was given didn't include. And I hate to acknowledge that now, 30 years later, I became a teacher in 1988. That we're not that far along right now. And as the superintendent, though, I am in a position to be able to do something about it. And so we are working on it. We're certainly better than we used to be, but we have a long way to go. There are a few things that we're doing to take care of that, and one of them is actually that we have, many of you all know Quraish Ali Lansana. Some of you know him very well. But he is working with us right now to do a review of our curriculum materials and to help us to think about ways in which we can bring in and do a better job of that. And I'll give you just a really quick example. So the reading program that we use for our elementary schools, I'm going to be teaching kindergarten starting on Wednesday because we have a teaching shortage, and we have vacancies. And when we have vacancies, we pull people from the district office because every child deserves a certified teacher. We have certified people in the district office, and so I'm going to be doing that this year, partly because it's needed and I have that certification, but also because it's demonstrates to the public that we have this teaching shortage. And I think a lot of people feel like maybe that problem has been solved, so we want to raise attention to that. But anyway, I digressed on that for just a minute. But anyway, so in those materials, I'm looking through, and one of the sections is on kings and queens. And there are no African kings and queens in the entire thing. It's about all these different kings and queens. Well, think of all the kings and queens that could have been included that are not represented in this material. And so that's just a quick example. That's just one that I just discovered. Actually, we talked about it, and then I was looking through the materials when I was preparing for this coming week. So it's just one quick example. So something I'm very interested in changing. And if you ever come across or have ideas, please raise it to our attention.
Thank you. Yes.
Go ahead.
It's important for students to be involved in the curriculum, because students or people are more apt to pay attention and to learn what they're interested in. They may be brilliant in one field and may not be interested in another field, so they may not study it as fervently as they would something they're really interested in. So let's find out what they're interested in. Maybe it's different. Let's bring back electives that matter, not just electives that a board put together and say, well, I think you should do this. Ask the students what they want. We have surveys for everything. Let's get a survey. Let's have a panel, get the children together and say, hey, what do you want? What do you want to learn? And when people are learning what they want to learn, they will learn. Not memorize, not be indoctrinated. They will actually learn skills that will help them be better people, which will help the community, which will help society, which will help the world. And yes, we could have peace.
I really love Fatodi's answer. That's not the way I was thinking of the question, but I love that that's where you went. We have these requirements that come along with an education. These are the boxes you have to check off before you can get a diploma in the state of Oklahoma. And there are, all these memes going around on the internet. Well, they shouldn't have to learn this, but they should have to learn this. And there are arguments for both sides. I think if we didn't have, and I hope that I don't just beat this over the head all day, but if we didn't have such a financial issue, there would be so many other things that we could do. It would be okay to have 5 kids sitting in a classroom doing one thing, and 5 kids sitting in a classroom doing one thing, and 5 kids doing something else, if we didn't have to worry about how are we going to pay all 3 of those teachers for just that hour that one day. So money would help a lot of things, right? But from my perspective as an English language arts teacher, that's all I've taught from 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, and now this is my 3rd year at 7th. I've actually been really lucky and really glad to be a language arts teacher, because we get a lot of freedom in what do we teach. They have to learn theme, but I can teach them theme using whatever text I want to, and so that's great. I think that in terms of social studies curriculum, in terms of science curriculum, in terms of math curriculum, we need more people like Harish who get the jobs at the district level, who get to say, like, these are some approved things we can do. These are some books, perhaps not even the adopted textbook, because, maybe we don't always want to go with Texas Instruments, but this is something we could read in social studies class that would aid in the students' learning of these standards, but that doesn't come straight from a textbook, just for example.
Tiffany, I'm interested as a student how you respond to that material. Like, is that a big issue for you as buy-in? I know you just kind of blanketly love school and all that, but is there like a difference there for you when you feel represented in the curriculum versus, well, this isn't, I don't know, my culture at all, or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think if I think that if students are learning what they not necessarily want to learn, but what they're interested in, it would help a lot. Because I love science, and I think I do best in science. because I'm more interested in it, and I love the whole aspect and everything that comes with it. But when it's math, I don't really like math as much, so it's a lot harder to learn in a way that students can't like really learn. I guess if teachers are I don't really know.
I see what you're saying. Like, we have to find another way to,
To
because it's a necessary thing,
Yes.
right? And as much as the English teacher part of me wants to say, yeah, let's axe all the math then. That's the solution. We need it, right?
Yes.
So it's figuring out that path to it, maybe.
Yeah, you're gonna have to either eat the mic or share the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, just put it closer to your mouth. We want to hear what you're saying because I can tell it's amazing. And way to support the English teachers.
Right. Anyway, so maybe just finding that, how do you engage with representation, but the other part of it is, what if, even if it doesn't have to do with necessarily that, like finding the way to engagement with necessary things, right? Always like a struggle to do, right?
Yes.
I know for me personally, like, it's an overused cliche, but it's literally like seeing the light bulb come on when you find that curriculum that works or taps in. And there's this other part too of not only finding curriculum that represents your students, but maybe doesn't even necessarily have to do it in such a hand-wringing way, right? Like some of us who have exposure to maybe, Black figures in history, right? It's always going to be the same, like 3 people, right? And it's not that those figures aren't important, but I think students, from my perspective being a teacher at the front of the classroom, really get excited when they just see themselves in the curriculum, even if it's just like, oh, this is just a story about a family that looks like mine, right? I don't know. That's kind of where my train of thought goes. Okay, moving on to the next question. So, one of the things that I want to talk about is, you guys have kind of touched on this with talking about what subjects are necessary, right? What things do we need to be learning about or really pushing in our education system? So, like, what are the important things that we need to ready our students? Some districts, take a heavy academic. We want 100% graduation and 100% enrollment in college, right? And then there's college and career, right? College, career, and tech. So what do you guys feel like are the major things that we need to focus on when readying these students to join the real world?
This is the question I was waiting for. No. So I have a friend from Nigeria who is in the military, and his whole objective of being in the United States is so he can attend university and just take random classes all the time and just learn new things. So he's a fascinating person to talk to. He said the thing that he noticed first about the American education system, his words, we're trying to educate thinkers and doers exactly the same way and the same time and on the same timeline and in the same buildings and in the same settings, and that just doesn't work. And we have some history of trying to track students into VOTEC or track them into AP or track them into college readiness, and of course that brings up a social justice issue, because what if that student, was tracked inappropriately? But I do think there is some benefit to readjusting, improving, using our teacher brains to figure out a way to do that right. I don't think that it has to be we can't track because it was done incorrectly in the past. I think there's a way that a student, that a family, that a community can choose tracks for a kid that makes sense for that kid and that do actually reach that child's highest potential. And I think if we did that, we'd be better off. I mean, that's so pie in the sky. It requires overhaul of our whole system, but I feel like it would be so great.
I was going to ask the next level up question is so what does that look like for just...
So at my old school, we used to talk all the time about just what if we didn't have to move 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade. What if you could just check off your classes? Like when you go to college, you have to take all of this. Take it whenever you feel like it, but you have to take all of this. And I think that might help. I think if we weren't on such a strict semester to semester, 9 weeks to, year-long schedule, cutting out summers, like that would help too. If a kid only needs a semester of this, or they need an extra semester of this, getting that stuff in, I mean, it would take a lot more scheduling, it would take a lot more counselors, it would take a lot more staff, but I don't really think it's impossible.
I see this trend of it's coming back to more of a financial part,
Yeah,
right? To
exactly.
support, yeah, there's a trend there. Go figure.
You and I are gonna have to follow up and have this conversation for a long time, because it is a topic that comes up all the time. I hear it all the time. People come up to me all the time and they'll say, well, not all kids want to go to college, and that's true. And there are great careers, very well-paying careers, where people can make a great living and have a very high quality of life. On the other hand, yes, too often what a lot of people mean when they say that is they're not talking about their own kids. They're talking about somebody else's kids. And those kids are typically not, in their minds, they're black and brown kids. So I just have to lay that out there real bluntly. So that is exactly the challenge. How do you make sure that you have a system that gives the kids the choice to make about what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, what drives them, and then help them to find the pathway that then allows them to explore that for the rest of their life, and find a place that they can continue to do whatever that is. But then it gets even more complex, because what we know is that the world has changed. And so the days of where you decided what your vocation was going to be, and you studied that one thing and then you did that for the rest of your life, has also changed. And so it's real complex, and that's why we have to talk about it for a long time later. But what I do want you to know is that in Tulsa Public Schools, we're doing some really cool stuff around this, lots of cool things. I'm just going to give you one example. So we have in Tulsa Public Schools the Design Lab. And one of our incredible Design Lab members is right here. Bracken is now a part of our Design Lab. And we, am I not supposed to say that? Oh, okay, that's okay. Did I just say something I wasn't supposed to say in public? Okay. It made me nervous there for a second. It's new. It's super new. Maybe I just announced that for the
Bracken just realized
first
how much
time
work
ever.
he has to do
I
now.
know. You are solely responsible for reimagining public education.
We're solving this problem. It's all you. But we trust Bracken. He's good people. Yeah.
I think it's because I started freaking out.
I know, I saw that reaction. I was like, oh dear. Anyway, so one of the projects in the Design Lab is called Tulsa Beyond. And it is about reimagining secondary school learning. And it's truly in the United States of America. Because the reason that we have that overly structured system is because 100 years ago, 12 white guys sat in a room and decided that we would have English and science and math and social studies, and they would all be separate, and bells would ring, and people would go to one class to another, and we would learn them in these separate ways. Because when you said that you loved science but you didn't love math as much, my first thought was, why are we not making sure you know how closely math and science are basically the same thing, and building on your passion for science to help you get passionate, so that is what we have responded to, this description of school and who created it, and we've done it ever since, and we just keep doing it. We keep ringing the bells, and the kids keep going from class to class. And so in Tulsa Beyond, we have blown up that concept, and we have said, what could school be? And we didn't sit around at the district office and do that by ourselves. We created design teams made up of students and teachers and parents and community leaders, and they spent a year reimagining what school could be. Blowing up this idea of what it's supposed to be, what we think it's supposed to be. So we have 4 schools that have been a part of that, and 3 of them are launching this week. And so we are really excited. They're happening at Webster, at Hale and at the Tulsa Learning Academy, which has been known as our, if you've ever heard of the mall school, it's our virtual school, but now they're going to have this school within a school that's going to be this design that they created. So anyway, that could go on for a long time. I'll just stop there.
I think that's good, and part of this is just knowing that some of these programs and resources are out there, right? If we're only paying attention to certain media sources or things like that, we may never hear about those programs, right? But being somebody who, like I said, I am a TPS employee and I work now as a new teacher coach, so I'm floating around all these different trainings and seeing our teachers attend all these different, week-long expeditions into how can we help the problem, how can we fix things, how can we bolster up the education system. And I can just say from that perspective, like, nobody is taking this lightly, right? And we are pouring money into it and people and energy, and sometimes I feel like it's just a matter of maybe as a community we can do a better job of maybe spreading that word and uplifting our districts too. Like, hey, we are doing this thing. Like, a lot of times it's easy for us to sit in the corner and say, well, this isn't happening and they should be doing this. And it's like, oh, but we are, right?
Can I add one thing? Really
Absolutely,
quick?
please.
So a little off the topic of what we were just saying, which is super exciting that Tulsa's doing that. There are, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It was about students and tracking. Oh, that's what it was. Sorry. So we were talking about, you said the a lot of the time we think like this track is for those black and brown kids. This track is for those lower SES kids. And I think that the community should probably make our voices a little bit louder on the topic of figuring out how kids can do what they want to do. Because at the same time that we say like college, career, whatever it is we say, at the private schools and the prep schools, it's very much college. But at the public schools and the regular schools, it's very much career. The internet seems to think that we only tell kids that they have to go to college, but I actually feel like I've taught almost exclusively at Mexican or black schools, and I have never heard people come into one of my schools and say, hey, little black boy, you can go to Harvard, you can go to Yale, you can go to Princeton. They say, you should be an electrician, you should be a plumber, you should get a CDL, which they could, and they absolutely could, but they could also go to Harvard, they could also go to Yale, Instead of just telling certain kids, it's okay to be an electrician, let's also tell those certain other kids, it's okay to try to go to Harvard.
That's right. And amen to that. And in addition to that, what we also know is that as we were talking about careers changing so much, the other thing that has changed is that the complexity of all those jobs you just listed are very much different today. And the kind of jobs that where you just do with your hands kind of stuff, even those jobs, construction and other, also take math and a knowledge of all kinds of things that you need to know. And so what we know is that there's a certain, when we say college and career ready, and what we want all of our students to be college and career ready, what we mean by that is there is a certain amount of information and skill and that students need to have in order to be successful in whatever they choose to do. And that what we have to make sure is that they know that they have lots of different choices, and then we have to make sure that they all reach that bar so that when they decide what that is, then they're ready for whatever that is.
I think that's a good point, and it further holds up this idea of engagement, right? That just because, okay, we're going to choose the academic route, or whether we're going to choose the what we traditionally think of as like blue collar jobs, like nowadays, yeah, that landscape looks a lot different. It reminds me of my dad. He's like this OG surveyor from back in the day, and he tells me about surveying from like the 70s or whatever. And he's like, we had the chain, and we went out there and we walked around and we had to do math on the notepad and things like that. And I've done environmental work in the past before I came to teaching, and worked with surveyors that were like, I don't know, I just walk around with this thing and it goes up to a satellite and maps it up, you know. And so it's like, if my dad was still in that industry, he would have to come there with the technology skills and all the other math skills that come with that. So I don't know, that just kind of furthers like we have to get away from this idea of you're only learning biology for biology's sake, or you're only reading this novel for the sake of being super into Victorian literature, which we all are, right? It's like we have to get past this mindset of, and I love Victorian literature, right? So my Downton Abbey fans around here, right? That's a little next. But anyway, but I find myself every year approaching it from a standpoint of English isn't just about literature, it's a vehicle for these other things, right? So we may read a science article in this English classroom or a psychology article or this environmental impact thing or something else, right? But it's a vehicle and in hopes of increasing engagement. Do you guys have any other things to say before we move on to the next?
So many, but...
We can sit and chat for the next couple of hours out here at Guthrie Green with Dr. Gist. She has lots to say. I just booked your whole afternoon for you. So on the subject of the landscape changing for students and careers, let's talk about how the landscape of this career of education has changed. So in the state of Oklahoma, we have, if you're not aware, we have a change in the number of emergency certified folks, which if you're not aware of that, basically, traditionally, when we think about traditional teachers, they go to university for X amount of years, they are education majors, they're studying how to be a teacher and that subject, concurrently in tandem. They get out, they have the teacher tests already taken, they're certified, and they get in the classroom, right? And it's what they wanted to do from day one of college, right? And then, I like how you smirked at that, right?
Day one.
Day one. I know what I'm going to be. And then the next level is we have alternatively certified folks, which, do we have any in the room? I am. Yeah. So that's like you halfway committed to like the subject, right? I don't, Naja, were you like a straight English major? Or?
I can tell my story. You want to tell it now, or you want to finish introing the question?
You do. I want to hear like 3 sentences or so.
Sure. So everybody always told me I could be a teacher. Didn't think that's what I wanted to do. Started out as a journalism major and was doing fine until that professor that I told you about. So changed my major to education. However, that was going to take a whole lot longer, and so I dropped the education part and just got my degree in English Lit and went the alternative route.
So yeah, kind of similar to that. I was straight English. My plan was like, I'm gonna go straight through, get my doctorate, get the tweed coat with the elbow patches, teach college. I'll land a gig right out of the gate, right? And then along that route, I did some stuff with youth programs, and I was like, I love teenagers, and everyone says they're terrible, but I love them, right? Sorry, awesome. Tiffany, no shade there. And so you take the test, but you have at least the subject background, right, the degree. Nowadays, we have the next step, which is emergency certified, which you could be a landscaper, or your major is in that. You have a college degree, right? It could be in anything, but you take some tests, we approve an application, and then we send you out into a classroom. Oklahoma granted a record number of, it was over 3,000 of emergency certifications last year. We're set to keep pace with that this year, as well as renewing those folks. So they're staying in the classroom with this background. And of course, as many of you are probably catching on, some people feel very conflicted about that, and it can be a point of contingency. I have my own personal opinions about it, which I'll share later, but I'm sure you guys also have those views. So I'd like to hear, for people who are in the game now, what is your opinion about that, this emergency certification? Because this is a reality, right? Our colleagues are now emergency certification people, our teachers, our community members, they're stepping in the classroom. What do you think?
You want to go or you want me to go?
I'm either way.
So I was, Okay, so what some people also don't know is that like once you do the alternative certification thing, you still have to take all the same tests and like you still have to pass the actual certification. What happens with a lot of our emergency certified friends is that they're not passing the tests, which for a variety of reasons, but they're not passing, a lot of them are not passing the test. I have several friends who are in that struggle right now. They'll take one, they won't pass the second one, they'll take it again, and of course these are $150 pop tests, right? And so if you fail it, then you have to decide, do I have another $150 on my teeny tiny salary to take it again? I do love kids, I do care about their education, I do want to be in this profession, but can I do this? Can I keep taking this until I pass it? I'm not 100% sure. We have to be careful that we don't assume that because we didn't sit in a classroom with sometimes a cool, trendy young person, but more often than not, like a 60-year-old person who's aged out of the classroom telling us what we should do in our classrooms. Because I didn't do that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't have some of these skills and or credentials, or that I haven't studied the profession, right? Because there are plenty of ways to study the profession. Oh man, I have so many thoughts. Okay, so I think we have to get better as people who are in the game of teaching those who are starting out. It's easier for us as English majors to go and teach English because that's what we studied, is literature. But my friend who is super passionate about kids and about the sciences, but her degree is in business, she's already failed the science test once, and she's like studying and she wants to do it, but it's hard because she didn't spend 4 years studying the sciences. And those tests are catered towards people who spent 4 years studying that. So we have to do better at getting teacher circles together, at sharing ideas, at sharing plans, at sharing strategies, and not just like, hey, come by my room if you need anything, because we do that a lot, as we run to go close our door and like hide in the corner and grade papers so that nobody bothers us.
It's like you've had a camera.
I think we just all do the same thing. So we have to actually go to them and help them do certain things. Because I don't even really know, it's probably different for elementary ed, but I don't know how much of the stuff you really need to know do you actually learn in that undergrad classroom. I'm just not sure.
I know Dr. Gist is ready to
You
pounce
were
on this
writing
question.
a whole lot of thoughts about this, and I would love to hear your perspective if you want to share.
Well, as a substitute teacher, I'm here taking notes.
Okay.
You told he's in school right now.
Oh, okay, I got it. Yes, so this is also a very complex topic, but I want to say a few things that I think are important. One is that in terms of those emergency certifications, the other thing that's important for you to know is that not only are there thousands of certifications that are emergency granted every year now in Oklahoma. That compares to just a handful of years ago. I believe the number is 5 years ago. It was 39 statewide. So from a humongous increase, that's a technical term, in the number of emergency certified teachers. So let me talk about that a little bit. So the first thing is that we have awesome teachers who are emergency certified, alternatively certified, traditionally certified, all of the above. We also have struggling teachers who are emergency certified, alternatively certified, and traditionally certified. So that's the first thing to know. We also have amazing, excellent teachers who are brand new teachers, and we have struggling teachers who are brand new teachers. And we have amazing teachers who have 30 years of experience and struggling teachers who have 30 years of experience. So all of that is true. And the other thing, though, that is true is that experience matters and preparation matters. So how can all that be true at the same time? Well, the reason is that there are many ways to be prepared and many programs that you can come through. And that preparation matters, but how you get it doesn't have to be the same for everyone. And what we have is a system, just like when we were talking a moment ago about our schools and how we've structured them. We have a system that is made to be a certain way, and then we have so much faith in that system working that we believe that that construct then therefore is supposed to equal something. But we just trust that system, that this magic thing called certification equals something. When, yes, it
100%
means
concrete.
something. When the reality is that system, all of the whole system, has been failing kids for a very long time. And so it's still the system. I used to be a state superintendent in 2 different states, if you count the state of DC. DC and in Rhode Island, and so I got to play in that world, but now we are just a part of that world. And so in Tulsa, we have we welcome teachers from every path from which they come, because we just want great teachers, but we also honor and respect our preparation programs, whatever they are. But because we have such a need, and because we saw so many emergency certified folks who can be wonderful, but they need a huge amount of support. And a lot of times that support falls on experienced and traditionally prepared, or experienced and prepared in other ways, teachers in the school, and then they have a whole lot of pressure when they already have too many responsibilities. And so what we did in Tulsa was we created what's called Tulsa Teacher Corps. And so it is a preparation program that we run. And it's a way for us to support teachers who want to come into the classroom but haven't gone through a traditional program, but we can provide them with the preparation. And we still hire everyone we can find from all those other preparation programs, but then we have this other program as well. But teaching is it's the most awesome, most amazing job in the world, and it's also really, really challenging. So this 2 years ago, when we had a shortage that year as well, and I taught 3rd grade. Well, I taught 3rd grade. Ethan and I were talking about this earlier because he's a 3rd grader, and I loved teaching, and I was awesome. I was awesome, but it's been a long time. And so I went into the classroom 2 years ago to teach 3rd grade, and I was like, this is going to be great. Well, guess what? It's really, really hard. And I knew that, but I had forgotten a whole lot of stuff. And so I'm like, whoa. And I was not good, because it is really challenging. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story. So I didn't have, I thought we were working on routines and stuff. It was the first day of school. I was trying to get them lined up, and it's like herding butterflies, and they come out, I'm trying to get them lined up to go to PE or music, I can't remember which. And I look down, and 7 of them don't have shoes on. And I'm like, where are your shoes? Well, Tamika told us to take our shoes off. I'm like, go back in there and get your shoes. Yeah, that kind of stuff happens about 25,000 times a day. So it is really complex, let alone the fact that you have these 27 kids that you're supposed to teach, math and science and English and everything all in one day. And you're also supposed to get them all up to where they need to be. They're at all these different levels. And for high school folks, they have too many, they have 180 or 200 kids on their roster, which is far too many, especially if you're teaching like English and you're reading essays and papers and things. But anyway, that's a different topic. But the reason I was giving that example is that new teachers, no matter their preparation program, need support. And it puts a tremendous amount of responsibility on the system to give them that support. And especially when they come from non-traditional programs, they need even more support. But regardless, new folks need support and mentoring and coaching.
I would like to say a couple of things on that. So as I already stated, I'm a little biased as a TPS employee and a new teacher coach, and that's one of my responsibilities. And this is going to be my first year doing that, and I've had to go through a bunch of training this summer and being there right alongside the people and the folks at Teacher Corps, at Tulsa Teacher Corps. And my wife and I, we're in the same position. And so we'd set in on these trainings with the emergency certified people that are going through the Corps and doing the sessions and things like that. And taking in this full day and seeing all the resources they're getting, gearing up for their first year, haven't even sat in a classroom yet. And they know all these things and they have all these resources. And we were driving home after like the first week of doing one of these, right? It's like a 6-week session thing. And we're driving home and it was kind of quiet. I was like, do you feel like we knew what we were doing in the classroom. It was like we wish we would have had that support, right? And we had been doing it for a long time, and we came from the alternative route, but we had been teaching for a long time. And what Dr. Giss said about that support, wherever level you're at, is so crucial, and like it's so important, and it's such a positive, good thing to see as an employee that we are supporting those new teachers and those emergency certified folks. And we went to their graduation where they were getting out of the program and meeting with their site coaches, and they were gonna, they had their site already where they were gonna go, where they were hired for. And it was, the energy in that room was so awesome. And I would just hate to think that, some stigma or uninformed conversation is maybe perpetuating this idea that they can't be prepared for the classroom or adequate enough, because those folks had some of the most awesome stories, and they obviously have that natural heart for kids. I know we had one that was, he wasn't going to be a teacher, and he was one of our teacher mentors' Lyft driver, and she convinced him to sign up for the program, like on the way. And so he did it, and then he was like a rock star. Like he got interviewed and like all this other stuff, and now he's going to be starting the year in elementary school for TPS. And it's like, if we didn't have that program, or those people or that support, that wouldn't happen. And now, and he's like, to add on to our culture thing, he is a black male who's going to be in front of those kiddos, and how important is that for that facet of it, right? And it was just so uplifting to see that, and I love that we have that opportunity here in the city.
That is an amazing story. I want to say one other thing about that, because that group of folks, some of them are retired. Some of them are recent graduates, but they studied some kind of content that they're now going to be teaching, like you talked about. They also, some of them were pharmacists, lawyers. I love that story. That's so great. But on that last point, the other thing is that we work so hard to recruit a diverse teaching staff, and it is really difficult. I mean, we go to HBCUs, we travel around the country, around the world for that matter, looking for educators. But our Tulsa Teacher Corps is, the majority of them are male and people of color. And so when I went to new teacher orientation this year, we had about 300 teachers in a room. Well, about a third, I think, are Tulsa Teacher Corps. And it was the most diverse group of educators that I have seen in maybe my entire career. Because we do not have a diverse teaching corps in the country, teaching force in the country, and we definitely don't here in Oklahoma, and so that's something positive about it as well. So all teachers need coaching and support, and can come to the career in different ways.
Real quick, so that nobody thinks I'm throwing shade on going to education's college. Let's remember our friends who wanted to get their degrees but couldn't for various reasons, right? I have like 6 black male coach friends, and they coach because they can do that like after their regular job, so they can come and they can be on the practice field, and they can go to these games because they didn't finish university for a myriad of reasons. They love kids. They would love to be in the classroom all day. But the idea of stopping working for whatever length of time to go back to school to pay to take the tests is a whole aspect. And so, as we talk about how are we training these current kids, like let's also remember those that we already essentially left behind, to speak to Dr. Stevie Johnson's work, those that we already left behind because we didn't help them get a degree 20 years ago or 10 years ago. So
maybe the next level is how do we expand the opportunities to those folks too, because I would love to work alongside that, right? If they're already giving hours. Tony?
This is a little different from the subject. If we could treat the current teachers better, then more people will want to go to school and be teachers. That's all I have.
Thank you for pointing that out. And if it's okay, we just run on that for a second. There are several things that more than several, lots of things that we don't do well. And we don't do it well as a country, and we for sure don't do it well as a state. And we all have talked about teacher compensation, that it's important to know we have not solved that problem. I think because the legislators acted in the last 2 sessions, which we're pleased that we've reversed course on that, but we have not even come close to solving that problem. And so it's important to know we have a lot of work still to do there. But the other thing is that it's the rest of the job. And so, you know, we, a few months ago in the early spring, I believe it was, this report came out. It's a national report that ranks states in terms of funding and different things. And Oklahoma had gone from the bottom to 36th in teacher compensation. And everyone was celebrating, which is good. We should be glad that we've made progress. Now, we have so much still more to do on that. But what did not get attention is that very same report said that we are 48th and 49th in per pupil revenue and expenditures respectively. And so that's the rest of education. So that is everything around class sizes and counselors and other adults who provide supports. It's access to the fine arts, it's access to other kind of coursework and opportunity, it's librarians, and it's technology, and it's all of the other stuff. And that affects children and their education for sure, but it also affects teachers and their quality of life and their working conditions, which then contributes to the teacher shortage. So all of that has to be addressed as well. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Tiffany, would you like to add your experience as a student, like sitting in a classroom? Do you with ratios the way that they are, some hours you'd have 32, 34 kids in a classroom?
Can you tell who's been trained and who hasn't?
I don't think you can tell who's been trained. I think teachers try their hardest to teach, and I think it's working, at least at Edison. But I know my Spanish class had 40 people in there, and there was one teacher, and it was so hard to learn. But this is my second year taking it, so I was already pretty well at speaking Spanish, but it was crazy. And then the classes that were less, you got to learn more. Like my math class didn't have as much students, so she got to, most of the time, got to get to everybody and help them out as much as she could. But the Spanish class was crazy. She tried her hardest. I know she did. I was one of the better students. But yeah, I think it's hard, especially when the students in there don't want to be in there, and so they're not going to try, and they're not going to support the teacher and let her teach. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that ties into what Fitoni had said earlier about, the kids not wanting to be in there necessarily, maybe because they don't have another option, because we haven't funded maybe one of those arts classrooms or something like that, which is what they would opt for, right, if they had the option. But again, it goes back to classroom funding. We get hung up on this, it's sensationalist, right? It's really easy to look at the poor teacher who's on food stamps or, qualifies for these other aid programs or things like that, or we see teachers, begging on the side. There was that one story, right? And it's easy to get hung up on that, and that is important, right? I can't speak for everybody, but I know for myself, the raise was awesome. At this point, I would take smaller class sizes over a raise, and seeing our kids go through classes in the day in classrooms where it's possible for the teacher in the classroom to make it to everybody and give that one-on-one instruction or do those things. So
We can talk about the lockout now.
yeah, I was gonna say you guys segued really nicely and kind of stole my next question. Yeah, about the but yeah, no, that brings up a good point. So we accomplished some things the walkout. And then we also obviously still have some work to do. So what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Dr. Gist, you can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that the money that was allocated, they say we're going to give this raise, they give the money to the district, and the district gives it to teachers, but that just comes out of the district pool's budget. Is that correct, or is it specifically slotted for salaries? Is the question.
It
Yes,
2
they
years
can't
ago
steal it
was
from salaries.
specifically and then
Okay.
there's, so it
Okay.
depends on how they do it, but.
It depends. It's up to districts. So my you can talk more about that in a second. I don't want to misspeak, but I wanted to just say my perspective on the walkout is that actually it's not even mine. A friend of mine who lost his job as a principal, not because he was bad, but because Oklahoma City closed 14 schools from last May to this August. So he just got lost in the shuffle. But he said they had already decided to give us this, what was it, $10,000? They had already decided, well, 6 and then 2 and then 2, theoretically.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually, right. So they had already decided to give us this raise, and if we hadn't walked out, they'd already decided it. Like, they didn't decide it after the walkout. They didn't decide it after we had a 2-week-long block party on the lawn. And his words, 2-week-long block party on the lawn. So I just think that it's a lot more systemic than that. I think it's a lot more, I think there's too many more conversations, just like everything we've been talking about up here. There's too many more conversations and too many more needs and too many more complexities that we would have to wade through. And we can't just throw a 3-year, $10,000 plan at it and say that we fixed anything.
Yeah, for sure. When I came home to Oklahoma in 2015, and I knew I was coming to a state that had not invested adequately in education for a very long time. And one of the reasons I knew that is when I became a teacher 30 years ago, I left Oklahoma to teach in Texas. It's still happening today. So more than 30 years we have continued to let this happen, and we haven't addressed it. What I didn't fully appreciate is that not only was I coming to an inadequate budget, but I didn't realize I was going to be spending so much of my time cutting budgets. It was going to get worse and worse and worse. And so, I mean, and I don't mean just annually. I mean, during the school year, since I've been in this job, they would say, okay, we're short, so now we're going to cut you again. And I mean, my first year we cut $13 million from the budget. And so I knew it was going to be a challenge, but I didn't realize that it was going to be as much of a challenge as it was. Because from 2008 to 2018, Oklahoma cut more per pupil to education than any other state in the country by a giant margin. So when you see that list, it's Oklahoma, and then the next state, which I don't remember what it was, it's a huge drop. And we already weren't investing. And so I was surprised by that. But I was also surprised at two things that don't seem like they're possible at the same time, but they are. Our teachers are the ones who are here, who haven't decided to leave, and many decide to leave because they just have to. I mean, they've not made the wrong choice, they've made the choice they need to make for their family, but the ones who stay are so dedicated, and they love our city, they love our kids, and they are just the most hardworking people. Today we're full throttle on back to school, so I've been at events since this morning, and so because of that I've been driving past a lot of schools. You know what I see at the schools? Cars. And I see cars because folks are there working, making sure they're ready, making sure the building is ready, making sure their classrooms are ready. People are just working so incredibly hard. But what we have to recognize is that there was also, at that same time that people are dedicated and hardworking, we had like a real, while there's this can-do spirit, there was a morale, there was a lull, a lack in, like a jump in people's step. And what I saw from the walkout is that it changed so much because people made their voices heard, and teachers saw that Oklahomans love them. Oklahomans do appreciate our teachers. We do believe in public education. And I think that there was really, people were not sure. Our teachers were not sure about that. You are correct that the legislators had already decided before the walkout about the raise. But what the teachers made very clear is that it was not just about them. The walkout was not just about their salaries. The walkout was also about their colleagues, our support employees, our paraprofessionals, our custodians, our bus drivers, everybody else who supports our kids, because they are so important as well. And it was also about all that other stuff that we were just talking about. It was about all the other things that we need to be investing in education. And so what the teachers made very clear is that their walkout was about the kids. They were not walking out on their kids, they were walking for their kids. And it mattered because even though we didn't get more, and they walked out because they said we were going to walk out because we want to see the rest of the investment, it did change the momentum. And so we've now had 2 legislative sessions where we aren't getting it done yet, but it's shifted. We've gone from cutting to reinvesting. Not enough, but reinvesting. Now Oklahoma City and Tulsa, among other districts in the state, are still making massive cuts, and we are looking at a year where we need to have serious conversations about it because of enrollment and other factors that are going in, and because our state doesn't do enough to support our kids whose families live in poverty, and so we're just in a different situation. But I do think that what we saw was this love for education. The walkout is, I know that you know that a group of teachers walked literally from Tulsa to Oklahoma City, and I walked with them. You probably know that as well. But what was so powerful about that was that I thought maybe it was just Tulsa, because Tulsa, we're biased about Tulsa. Tulsa's awesome, I thought maybe it was just Tulsa. But what we found is that it did not matter. We walked on all these little dirt roads all the way, we didn't walk on the dirt roads, but you know what I mean? Like, we walked along dirt roads, and there would be these long driveways, and families would pull these little red wagons out, and they didn't look like they had a lot of money to be spending on like bottles of water and stuff, but they would buy us apples, and they would hand them out, and they'd say, "We love you," and their kids making signs, and people would drive by, and they would honk and give us thumbs up and blow kisses. That happened the entire way. Oklahomans showed that they love and value teachers and public education. And I just have to tell you one really quick story because it's so awesome. So one of the houses we were walking by, right at the street, was a box that was like kind of torn up, but on the side of it, and the box was weighed down by some rocks inside of it, and then on the side of it, written with like different magic markers, and you could just imagine like she had gone in her drawer and found all these magic markers, and like, well, that one will only make one part of the A, it's all these different colors because she was trying to find some that worked, and it said, "Teachers, this is going to make an awesome movie someday. Love, Grandma."
Oh.
That is true. I have a picture of it. It was so. I just imagine her dragging that box out to the street. Oklahomans love teachers. They love public education. That voice was heard loudly and clearly by our elected officials. Now we just have to hold them accountable for continuing.
What do you guys? Oh, you get. Go ahead and go, Pitoti.
Just something I just wanted to say something quickly, Dr. Gist, educators, Mr. Juan. Your students missed you. When you were walking, I was substituting, they were protesting with y'all. Students realized that the teachers aren't there just to make money because they're not making that much money. So they're not just here to get a check. They can't be here to just get a check. They must love us. You can't do my teacher like that. So it had an impact on the students as well.
I appreciate that, and it was. I can speak to that too when we came back, and the attitude, And at the time, I was teaching middle school, which I don't know if you guys know any middle schoolers, but they don't like anybody. It seems that way, but even at the middle school, they were like happy for us, and they were trying to take what they'd seen on the news or heard in their house and reconcile it with what we were doing in the classroom and what was happening. I had my middle schoolers at the time. I used to have these white chucks that I used to wear that I teach in, and my kids would give me a hard time because they'd get dirty like pretty instantly, and they used to like dog me all the time about, "How come your kicks aren't clean, Mr. Juan?" And then after the walkout, the very first thing they said was like, "I guess you can finally buy some new chucks now, huh?" But yes, that there was a feeling of community there, and that was so important to see that support, and yeah, standing on intersections and hearing the honks and the waves of support. Has kind of a follow-up question. We know the support is there, right? We know the average Oklahoman sees the importance of education, and we have a student body that is also supportive, right? And we have people in the trenches willing to do the work, the educators. So what to you guys explains this kind of deficit? Like, are we just generally, does it feel like we're a less fortunate state or a less provided for state economically, or is it money management? What are y'all's thoughts on that? If we have the support.
I don't want to seem like the Debbie Downer up here, but support doesn't mean a lot if you're not doing anything. Thank you for my bottled water, thank you for my apple, thank you for my sign, but who did you vote for? Thank you for saying my teacher matters, thank you for your repost on Facebook, but who are you voting for the next time? And for the people who are in office, and the people who are friends with the people who are in office, and the people who work in the buildings where the people work in office, their kids don't go to public school, and so they don't care that much what happens to public school. And until their vote says that they do, I have a hard time believing that they do. It was fun. We all felt good. How honest do I want to be? Okay, so this is all the way. So originally I didn't go. If we had to like say where we were going to be. Are you going to go to the walkout, or are you going to be in the building in your classroom? And I had just come off of maternity leave. I said, I've got papers to grade, and this looks like BS to me. So I was in my classroom for the first couple of days, but social media is convincing. And I watched and I said, wow, people are really excited. And my friends from my old school were like, this is democracy in action. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm kind of young. I don't want to be the person who sat on the sideline while a revolution was happening. Okay, so I'll go. So my team and I, we decided to go. And it is so, the excitement is catching. When people are excited, you get excited, unless you're a sociopath. And so people were supportive, and that was lovely. And there were tears, and there were kumbayas, and we sang, and we marched, and we had our signs, and it was great. And then it was over, and nothing changed. And not nothing, but not enough changed. And I just can't, I feel like if we focus too much on the thank you guys for our pats on the back, then we're still going to get people voting for the same people they already voted for, who are still going to vote in budgets that don't help us.
I appreciate the realness of that.
Yeah.
I
I do too, and it does come down to who are we electing, and who's there making the decisions, and are we holding them accountable for making those decisions. I think one of the things that matters is everyone who runs says they support education because they know that it matters. And then if you're a regular person and somebody comes to knock on your door, or they leave you some literature or whatever, and they say, I support education, you're like, okay, cool. But we have to make sure people have the information about who's voting for what and who's supporting, because I know there are lots of people. There's someone who represents my district, and I won't say whether it's the Senate or the House, but to be too specific, but okay, I'll say, no, I'm just kidding. But who says that education matters, but then I know good and well how that person votes and what kind of things are being led. But anyway, I just we have to get organized, and I don't see as many. I think the best organizing bodies right now in the state are probably the teachers union and the PTA, in terms of having the kind of structures that you need to get the message out. But I think we have to do a better job locally of organizing. We're really fortunate that that the parents, what's it called, the PLAC, There's one in Bixby, and there's one, but they just started one in Tulsa. That will be very helpful. And so if you follow me on Facebook or Twitter, I'll make a commitment right now to, in the next week, to push that out, so then you can see it, so people will know, because those are folks who will put out a thing and say, okay, vote's about to happen, contact your representative, contact your senator, make sure they know what you expect, make calls, and then people just knowing what to do. Like, I don't think a lot of people know that calling is more important than sending an email. Well, how would you know that? Like, most of us don't call people that much anymore. But calling the office matters. And whether you're a registered voter matters, because they will look it up. They will know. And people, do they know that? Plus, would they need to be registered so that they can vote anyway? So all of this, know your district, know who represents you, know. All of that makes a difference. And then holding people accountable for their actions and not just what they say.
Yeah, amen to that for sure. We accomplished a lot of good things happened, but it's definitely still time to keep the foot on the gas, right?
Just one other thing about the walkout really quickly. I appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate your healthy skepticism about that. Because it was very exciting, but I'm all in, and I'm all in now, because I truly believe we would not, while we're not there yet, I do not think that things would have turned around the way they have if it hadn't been for the walkout. I really don't, because I don't think, now they have more pressure. We have to, though, keep the pressure on, and we have to raise the expectation, because the $1,200 raise that came this year was just, I appreciate it, but it was not enough. I mean, in Dallas, not only is the starting salary $52,000, their annual average increase is $3,000 a year. So how are we going to catch up if we think that $1,200 is we're like yay, when that ought to be a given? So we do have to make sure that we don't feel complacent about it now that, like, the walkout happened and now it feels like history.
I will say, to answer to both sides of the skepticism and the optimism, is like, I do know that, paying attention to voting records and doing that research and registering to vote, if you came here for pragmatic steps, step one, keeping up with who your district person is. If you move, change that's now your community. You live there now. Change and keep up with their stuff, their community issues. It's going to change who your rep is and your district person. And because it was disheartening to see a few people that were so vocal about still being harsh with funding education and their attitude towards teachers, to see them reelected. Like, three or so more months later, some of those same figures were reelected. To speak on the optimistic part, we also had a lot of teachers get elected, which that was awesome, right? And we had John Waldron here from Tulsa, Booker T. Like, shout outs to TPS, right? So I'm hopeful with their input, but we definitely have to keep the foot on the gas. Do we have any other comments before we shift gears here?
I had a question. This is really out of ignorance. I want to know, what happens to the tax money that's supposed to go towards education? What about, I may be wrong, like I said, this is out of ignorance. I thought the building the casino was supposed to help with education. What's going on with the not that you know, I don't know, I'm just.
Oh, I know.
What's going on with the tax money that's supposed to be allocated for education?
Well, the tax money that's allocated to education goes to education. It's just that there's not enough of it.
Right.
And Oklahomans have this impression that we are so heavily taxed, and we are among the very lowest. The individual tax burden is among the very lowest in the country, the overall tax burden. Our sales taxes are very high, and so sometimes that's what people think about. But the reason sales taxes are high is because municipalities are funded by sales tax, and it was complex. But But our overall tax burden is very low. So that's the reason that the dollars aren't there for education. And then there are also a lot of things that make it super challenging for our legislators in terms of creating the state's budget, because there are a number of things that they are legally obligated, because past legislatures have put this in place, that there are certain things that come off the top before they can ever even start to allocate the rest of the budget. And one example is roads and bridges. So Roads and Bridges has a dedicated fund that is legally committed to increasing every year. And, you know, I think roads and bridges are very important, but I don't think that, you know, I'd rather educate a kid than I'd rather drive around a big pothole. You know, I mean, I'd like to have both, but if we were choosing, you know, why isn't education the thing that comes off the top before we decide about the rest of it? But anyway, and the question about the casinos, the one that people often ask about is the lottery, so I'll talk about that one really quickly too, so that the next time you hear this at a dinner party, you can correct the people when they say, well, I thought this was supposed to fix everything. Well, the lottery, I think I wasn't here when that was, as I understand it, there were a lot of promises made, so I think that's why people think it was supposed to fix everything. But the lottery brings in about $70 million a year. Well, the overall state budget for education is more than $2 billion a year. So if you think about that real quickly, it is a tiny part of that, and it just is not, it's not a solution. The casinos are a different situation. So, you know, as you know, the casinos in Oklahoma are on Native American land, and so of course Native American, because it's on Native American land, they're governed. They govern themselves, so they're under no obligation. They're not taxed, so they're under no obligation to make generally to pay taxes, for example. And but what the agreement is, the agreement that the state has, the compact that you've been seeing in the paper a lot lately, is about an agreement that the state has with the tribes about exclusivity. So what the state has said is that we will not allow, like Steve Wynn or Harrods or somebody, to come into a private casino in Oklahoma that would have the obligation of paying taxes. We're not going to do that. We're going to let you have the exclusive rights to be able to do that. That is what the compact is about, and that is why they contribute right now the 6%. And so what the governor has said is that 6% is outdated. It was put in place 15 years ago. It's a 15-year compact. It was put in place 15 years ago, and it's about to expire. It expires at the beginning of 2020. And they're disagreeing about whether or not it was supposed to, if it expires, it just continues as it is, or whether or not if it concludes, then it has to be renegotiated. I don't know the answer to that, but I know some very, very capable lawyers have looked into it, and the governor is on the right side of that legal agreement, but I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to that. But when it was put into place, these were like little bingo halls. Like, things have changed dramatically since that time, and that's, so, you know, at that time it was just a whole different situation. And when you look at other states, and I have, they range everywhere from up to 35% from our 6%. And then there's also the issue of, there are different, I think they're called, what are they called? Not tiers, but like, you have slot machines are one kind, table gaming is another kind, and it's how much each of those are taxed. So it gets really complex, but you know, it's a very sensitive issue, and I understand the sensitivities around it. But the thing to know is that the compact is not about saying that they have to contribute because what they do on their own land is up to them. That's not the issue. It's about the exclusivity. So if people are saying, well, it's not fair, they ought to be able to do it because it's their land, yes, but that's not what the compact is about, and that's an important point to know.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for clearing that up, and maybe making some more information available for some of us, for sure. And I think it's also important to name too that when you're talking about $70 million for state lotto being a drop in the bucket, well, okay, where do we find sustainable funding from tax revenues? And we have to look at what is what is our consistent industries that are pulling in lots of money, and what are we doing to keep that accountable? And I understand that's a sensitive subject too, right? Because we want to stay competitive and attractive and keep those top industries here, right? But we also have to look at the grand scope of things, and if it's costing us potholes and uneducated kids, is that a fair trade-off?
Right, we're not investing in ourselves, and we're not only losing generations of kids, we're hurting our own state. And we're just letting it happen without recognizing the magnitude of what we're letting happen. Just on the compact, just real quickly, because I think it's important to understand scale. So the 6% now, and the governor has been talking about 25. That's what I believe to be true. I don't speak for him, of course, and then people are saying, well, that's too much. Okay, well, maybe so, but it's a negotiation, right? And then there's also sports betting, which they want to have come, so that's would likely be a part of that negotiation. But what I can tell you is that this is, first of all, it's dedicated, the vast majority, I believe it's 88%, it's a huge majority of it is automatically for education. And I don't have the numbers, I apologize, I don't know them exactly, but I believe it's 9%, it's just a small increase, it's not the governor's higher percentage. That alone, what I saw calculated is $700 million for education. $700 million for education. And what I can tell you for Tulsa is that that's about $40 million. Tulsa, when you look at the percentage that would likely come to us, depending on how they allocate it and all of that. But that would give us the ability to do. It's about when you look at the comparison of what Texas spends per pupil. That's kind of what we would be able to do per pupil. It would be a game changer. So that's just something important to know.
Thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, unless we have more to say on that, that's so much valuable information and things to think about, right? We just had a mini economics class. Thank you, Dr. Giss. Now we all know how that works, right? So shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about reconciling two things in our culture, specifically at maybe Oklahoma City Public Schools, and probably, this definitely falls under the umbrella of what's at the heart of TPS, part of what's at the heart of that. Is this relationship between law enforcement and student bodies, and then also our culture of safety or perceived safety. I have to say, one of my favorite things about little kids and having little kids like my son Ethan, who's here, is you get this unfiltered honesty sometimes, right? Radical frankness, as Brene Brown might say, right? But he, on the way up here, he knew we were coming to this kind of talk, and we'd be talking about these community issues and things like this, and he voiced his concern. He said, what do we do if somebody shows up there that's angry at us for saying the things that we're saying and they want to shoot us? I mean, he's going into 3rd grade, and that stuff is on his mind. And so we think about, this is our reality, like gun violence and that kind of looming threat, and thinking about what role, resource officers play in that and law enforcement. But then we also have the other side. If we look at statistics about, arrest rates and suspension rates, particularly for our brown and black boys and girls, right? And what kind of culture we're setting up there. How do we reconcile those two things? What are our thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have several. One of the schools that I worked at, the school that I worked at for the longest time, at high school, mostly black, I was there for 3 years. I think I had 2 white kids in high school. And so, really small pocket. But they are a school that doesn't have any metal detectors. I'm gonna hone in on metal detectors so we keep it realistic, right? So we were in a training, and the question came up of how do students view metal detectors at their school? And they said, as adults, we only see it as safety. And of course, this is also speaking to a specific social status of adults also. Because even me, I did a lot of traveling when I was younger. So when I think metal detectors, I think just like at the airport. Like, you have to go through the metal detector so that everybody's safe. You put your stuff on the thing, and like, it's just a safety thing, and it's no big deal. Because that's what I associate it with, and that's what a lot of adults associate it with. Well, if you're a kid who's never been to an airport, you associate metal detectors with, they don't think that I am safe. They think that I specifically, like, might have come here to hurt somebody. They think that I specifically have something that I'm not supposed to have. Some of our students also associate them with prisons, because you have to check your stuff at that door as well. So it has to do, and court, yes, prisons and court. So it has to do with your perspective. We do have to keep our kids safe. We have to be so careful of how we do that. At Millwood, there are no metal detectors there. And people were like, oh, this is great, look at this, like, this is a model black school. We don't have to worry about safety. We don't have any metal detectors, blah, blah, blah. Great, never been an incident, knock on wood there won't be. It's a great community. But I knew one of the, not the resource officer, but another person on the security committee, and he was like, but we have no idea what kids are carrying in their backpacks because we don't have a metal detector, you know? So it's a super double-edged sword, but I think at the root of anything that we talk about with safety, we have to talk about equity in our communities. We have to talk about why, or what can we do about our anger and our violence and our mental health. We have to talk about what do we do about fights. My kids are having, I teach 7th grade right now, my kids are having all these questions about fights, and administrators are always trying to figure out how do you stop fights. And of course you say fight and you're like, if you think of a 3rd grader fight, it's like not a big deal, but if you're thinking of high school fights, it's a huge deal. And if you're thinking of a school with no metal detectors and somebody's got a shiv in their shoe, it's a huge deal. So what are we teaching our kids? What are we teaching our communities? How can we talk to our communities about anger and about violence and about resolving conflict? And like there are so many questions there, and there are lots of theories about how to answer them. But I think that figuring that out is, it's instead of being reactionary, how do we protect once we've already got a problem inside the school? It's like, how do we catch the problem before it gets to the school?
That's a good differentiation to mark on.
We don't have metal detectors in Tulsa Public Schools, and a few people, not many, but a few have approached me about that. And my experience from being the state superintendent in Washington, D.C. is that metal detectors were only negative. Mm-hmm. And for all the reasons that you described, it was, they don't work. We've had plenty of guns in our schools with metal detectors in our schools, and they were it kills culture. I mean, they don't work and they're terrible. So then you have to, though, make sure that you are keeping kids safe. And so there are so many things that we do. I'm trying to I was sitting here like, which ones do I talk about? I want to focus on a couple things. One, I'm gonna change the topic a little bit, and then I'm gonna come back to it. I want people to know that we have invested a huge amount in our school buildings to make sure they're safe. So more than about half of our schools right now have a double secure entry. Now this is from intruders. This is different from, there are all kinds of ways we have to keep kids safe, but we already have, all of our schools are secure in that you have to be buzzed into the building. But we now have these enhanced secure buildings where you're buzzed into the office rather than having a sign that says, please go to the office. Not everybody's going to pay attention to that sign, of course. And so you buzzed into the office, and then you can't get into the rest of the school until you're buzzed again. And so that's happening at all of our schools, but we have to do them just as quickly as we can. So we're getting those in place. We also, it's important to know, we have cameras everywhere. And not only do we have cameras everywhere, we have 24/7 monitoring of those cameras. And so we have people who sit, and you can go in the room and it's a wall full of televisions, and it's just every school, and they flip around, and so we have extensive monitoring going on in our schools. So police. So we have, in Tulsa Public Schools, we have our own police force. We have a police chief and we have police officers. Now, there's a lot of controversy about having police in schools, and there should be, because it can be done very badly, but we have worked really hard to make sure that that it's done well. We just did a big reorganization of our police force, and we're completely changing how we do this. And the first thing we did was we looked around the country and we said, well, who's doing it well? Well, the answer is no one. Right. And so we said, okay, well then we're going to be the model for how to have security and a presence of the police in schools to keep kids safe and teachers safe, but also to do it in a way that doesn't contribute to the school to prison pipeline, that doesn't contribute to negative feelings between children and police, but actually does the opposite. And so it'd be too long to tell you all of what we're doing, but just know that you'll be hearing more. We will be the model for how to do that right. Our police officers just this summer were going through a lot of the training that we've typically only done with our teachers, and they're going through all of this about trauma-informed and restorative practices and all this kind of stuff. So that's happening. That's important for you to know. And then along the lines of just danger and intruders, and then I want to go back to this other topic again. We have in Tulsa Public Schools, there was, it breaks my heart that I cannot remember which national school shooting it was. It was not Stoneman Douglas, because that was more recent. I believe it was the one in Houston. That just says a lot right there, doesn't it? But it was after one of them. This happened in a lot of places nationwide, but there was this rash of reports of danger that were not real, but we investigate all of them. And so we had, in Tulsa, we had like 6 or 7, and then I found out that it was happening all across the country. It was really this strange phenomenon that hasn't happened after others, so I don't know what that was about, but we would get all these calls that would say, a kid has made a threat or whatever, and so we investigate all of them. Well, I was listening to the radio one day, and they were interviewing this mom, and she said, well, I knew I couldn't call the school district because it was a Sunday and no one would be there. And I was like, oh my gosh, 24/7. No, yes you can. She didn't know. And so that combined with the fact that we know that the most effective and important thing we can do to stop any kind of violence or danger in schools is prevention. And so we created what's called See, Hear, Share. It's kind of like at the airport. If you see something, if you hear something, anything that gives you pause for even a moment, share it with us. And then we created a phone number that people could remember, because we'd been telling people our regular phone number. No one's going to know that. So the number it's 918, of course, and it's 480-SAFE. And the way I remember it is 48, that we're going to be doubly safe. So 480-SAFE, that's just the way I remember it, but it's 480-SAFE. We're trying to make sure everyone knows. They can also email at safe@tulsaschools.org. Anything. I heard, I thought I heard, I saw on Facebook, my kid told me that somebody at school said whatever it is, and it can be anonymous. And so all of that's important to know, because we track it down, we have investigators, we will find out, and the best thing would be if it's not something. So people don't need to worry whether it is or it isn't. They just need to tell us so that we can find out. So all of that is happening. But then there's this whole other part of this that is about culture in schools, relationships that everyone have in schools, teachers to kids, teachers to teachers, kids to kids. This whole part of it affects everything. It affects fighting, it affects acts of violence, it affects quality of experience, it affects academics. And so we've placed a huge priority in Tulsa Public Schools on what we call belonging. That we want every single child and adult who comes to Tulsa Public Schools to know that he or she is not just accepted for who they are, no matter their race, their immigration status, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, whatever it is, they're not just accepted, but they are celebrated for who they are, and that's how we treat one another. And then it's how do we make sure that we place a priority on relationships, that we are building relationships with kids and each other, that we are supporting them and building those relationships with each other, that we take the time to do that, because the pressure is so high on all of us because we want our kids to leave our schools college and career ready. So we don't often spend as much time as we need to on this other topic, but what we know is that if we don't, then we can do all the things in the world on that other side, but we're not going to be as effective if we do the work to create cultures in our schools in which people get there and they're glad to be there, they want to stay, they have those relationships, they feel safe and supported and loved all in our schools. And then there's also everything around restorative practices and being trauma informed and making sure that we don't think that punishment alone is like how we get kids to behave. You know, if we just send them home, you know, I'm sure if we suspend that kid, you know, he's gonna be sitting home thinking, gosh, I really wish I hadn't done that, and I'm gonna do better next time.
And I'm so sad I'm not at school.
And yeah, I mean, that's just not what happens. It might make us feel better, like we think, well, we punished. But what we know is, yes, there are consequences. Of course there are consequences. But we have to be smart about that, and we have to recognize that there's restorative things that have to happen so that the behavior that we want is learned, so that we solve the problem that created the issue in the first place. And it's such a big topic, but I know I've gone on for a long time. So
That's okay. Thank you.
I want to hear Tiffany.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Tiffany, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you feel safe in the building? Do you feel like you have those open doors and relationships to student, to teacher? How do you feel?
I'd like to think I feel safe. I think I feel pretty safe at school. I think our security guards do a really good job of making all of us feel safe. I also feel that the student-teacher relationships aren't as well as they should be. I feel like teachers make it kind of almost intimidating for students to want to confide in them and to trust them fully. And then the student-to-student, Edison is a very, you stick to your certain groups, so it's very hard for people to really be able to go out there and make friends. I personally try my hardest to talk to everybody and be friends with everybody and make relationships with my teachers, just because I love school and I want to be able to know my teacher and know their passion for what they're teaching. So, yeah.
Yeah, we're not done, right? We still have a lot of culture building to do. We have a lot of accountability to do on the fiscal side and policy side. It's this, endless, work. Before we shift over to the Q&A section real quick, I want to just acknowledge and appreciate you guys out in the audience as well as coming here and listening to these perspectives. I mean, educators are not monolithic, superintendents and district employees are not monolithic, students. Tiffany has a great perspective, but she doesn't speak for all students, right? And dang it, yeah. Love school and homework, yeah. I mean, go out and clone yourself, please, but doing the job of showing up to things like this and having that dialogue, we learned all these perspectives and these things because you guys showed up today and had that conversation and sat in here. I encourage all of us to do the same with our colleagues if we're in education, or fellow students, or for community members. You'll hear lots of overlap. Naja and I have a lot of overlap on some things, but we have differences on some things, right? Same with me and Pitoti, right? And our experiences. But go out and have those conversations, and I applaud you guys for doing the step of coming here today. Thank you. Yeah. That being said, we have about 10 minutes or so for some Q&A with you guys, and then I think Naja is going to close us out with a poem. So do we have any questions that you guys have? Bracket, yeah.
So I had a couple of points to speak to on the taxation. When the lottery bill was signed into existence, it was written into the law that that money had to go towards education, and the legislature couldn't defund education to the tune of however much that brought in. So the legislature ultimately did defund education to the tune of however much the lottery brought in. They were sued and they lost, and they're still paying that back. And the folks who defunded it are still in office because we don't pay attention and we keep voting for these same people. So this next part is still like, I'll phrase it as a form for, I'll put it in the way that it's something to think about, right? We're looking at taxing Native Americans who we have traditionally treated horribly as a nation at a rate higher than we're currently taxing the oil and gas companies who we've as a state and nation treated as like gods and kings. So I think it's something to think about why it's so politically viable to tax the royalties of like we haven't given reparations to many people or any people.
Nope.
And I'm saying, why are we looking at taking away the profits of an underprivileged, underserved, underfunded, neglected community, and we're not looking at taxing an industry who's seeing record profits, and states around us are taxing them at a much higher rate. So that's something to think about, and that's the tax clarification.
I think in the history of all of mankind, no group or people that holds power has willingly just given that over. And so this brings it back to our point about having to keep people accountable, right? And paying attention to those things. That's a great point.
Well, I would like to respond to that because I totally agree with you about that. And I respect and I know that, and honor the land, all of this land. We are all on native land right now. I mean, the whole country for that matter, but Oklahoma for sure. And so, believe me, those small pockets that they still retain their, autonomy over, I respect. I just want to point out again, it's about the exclusivity. That's what the compact is about. And so that's the difference. Otherwise, I think it totally does change that conversation. But I think your point about why would it be different than other taxes for other businesses, I would like to point out though that the gross production is not the only tax that those businesses, so those percentages can't be compared just percentage by percentage.
It's a good distinction to make. Do we have another question from the audience? We've got it.
I have, you had mentioned, and I totally agree, today you don't plan for a career and you do that for 30 or 40 years. We don't even know what jobs are going to be there in 5 years or 10 years. So I'm wondering, with this new design center, are we building in the opportunities and ways to teach our kids more critical thinking and learning how, well, I have the skill to do this, how could it apply to this new kind of profession? Was that taken into consideration in the design?
It absolutely was, and I wish I could just implant you into everything these teams have done, and this has been going on for a couple of years now, or 3 actually in total, and there were multiple steps to the process. There was 1 whole year of discovery, and that included empathy interviews with thousands of children, teachers, parents, community members, and learning from them, from their words, about the experiences that they have in our schools. So the voice of the students was present not only on the design teams, but also it was very much a part of the information that the teams were using. But they also looked into how is the world changing? What is happening? We should be a place that says, we're not a place that's just preparing kids for the workforce. We are thinking past that and around that corner to be the kind of district, the kind of city that prepares kids to be the ones who are leading that change. They're not just ready for whatever it is at that moment, but we're actually ahead of that. And so that's sort of the idea behind what they're trying to come up with. The designs are different at each of the schools. The fourth school that I didn't mention is McLean. The 4 schools at McLean is just in a different, they're just doing theirs a little bit differently, so they're not launching, they're launching differently this coming school year. But they all look a little bit different, but there are a couple of things that are, probably more than that, but at least a couple I'll point out that are similar among them. One is that they're all focused on personalizing the learning for the kids. So you were making such a great point about, maybe it takes me more time to learn that topic than everyone else, but maybe, and I'm guessing you're in this boat, I could learn it faster, and I could go deeper and longer into that thing, and or move on to another thing or whatever it is, and we have those, yes, you have to sit in this class for the entire semester to get the credit, even though you really only needed half of that amount of time, and we're holding kids back. And then we're moving other kids on before they're ready. It's so messed up. It is so messed up, and yet that's the system, so that's what we do anyway. We're not doing that anymore, at least not in these schools. And we actually have personalization going on in dozens of schools in Tulsa, but yeah.
Yeah, I want to shout out Monroe. They have a great mini society program where they take what they learn all day and implement it into a mini society, and they let students come up with ideas for businesses, and they get to decide what they want to do with the I think it's Monrovian money that they spend at those places and how to do those things. So very pragmatic, applicable things, and that if you want to really lend your hand and take away a pragmatic step, show up to Monroe day one, cheer those kids on in the building. They're taking on some new challenges this year with a great staff and team, and then walk into the front door afterwards and ask what you can do to support that as that school goes through its huge population change and culture change. And there's going to be some awesome things coming out of those kiddos for sure this year.
Yeah, that's amen to all of that. We have 2 schools that do what's called micro-society. One is Thoreau and the other is Monroe. But the difference is that Monroe used to be a magnet school and is going to become, on Wednesday, it will be the comprehensive middle school for the McLean neighborhood. And so it's tripling in size, and it's a very big deal. It came about because community leaders led a process and made the choice for that to happen, and so we're following their lead and making their dream come to life, and it's a very big deal, and we're very excited about that work. And yes, I love it. We are going to do a big clap-in line. We'd love to have other schools do clap-in lines too. We'd love to have everybody in Tulsa. Can you imagine what if the whole city, on the first day of school, we all, no matter your age of your kids, no matter what you do, we all went to schools and just had these lines of people just clapping in the kids and teachers and saying, welcome back, let's launch another awesome school year. We'll test this out at Monroe, because I think we're gonna have a good group of people there. It's gonna be fabulous. But yes, so personalization is hugely important, and personalization can look a lot of different ways. But I love that you brought up Monroe and Monrovia. At Thoreau, it's called the Emerald City. That's their city. But it's the other part that's similar in all of those designs is personalization, but the other is a connection to the outside world. So we lock kids, and I don't say that, I mean, we literally lock them, and the doors they can get out, obviously, but it's like they're confined to the school. And in high school, including in high school, which, I mean, the minute they graduate, they're off in the world, and we haven't even given them a chance to fall down and skin their knees a little bit and figure it out. And so these schools, the other part of the models that are consistent is that changing that and having there be much more porous between school and the community. Our schools are resource deprived, but our city has so many things to offer. We have beautiful museums and parks, libraries, so much that businesses, so much that our kids can experience. real world problems for them to solve, things for them to work on that are interesting and engaging, and combine math and science and writing and history and all of that together through projects. Bracken was actually one of the, I don't know what you'd call yourself when it comes to Tulsa term, what would,
Facilitator?
well, yeah, but like getting it off the ground and like, so one of the like people who helped to launch what's called, co-founder, I guess, of Tulsa term. Okay, well, what you
She's a co-founder.
oh my gosh, I didn't even recognize you. Oh my gosh.
But I owe it all to Bracken.
No, well, I don't know about that, but the person who's making it, it's come to life because of your lead. And so together, this team, I'm sorry I did not even recognize, the lights are kind of weird.
I'm not here for them.
I know you're not, but I'm getting ready to talk about it anyway. So Tulsa Term is a collaboration between Hall & Hall and Tulsa Public Schools, and we are so grateful for that. And it is students from both systems, and the city is their school. And so they go from real world problem to real world problem, and everything comes together. And I'm sure I'm butchering it, but the schools that are in Tulsa Beyond are, there's some similarities there. And then we have another program called City Lab that's also sort of modeled, and Bracken's going to be leading that work in the design lab. So we're really trying to change this idea that school only happens in school buildings. It only happens in this class, and then the bell rings, and then you go to the next class, and so on and so forth. And so that's what we're trying to bust through, because we're not going to prepare kids for not only today's world, but let alone what the world is going to be if we keep doing stuff that wasn't working 50 years ago. And now we think it's going to work now. We got to change it.
Absolutely. On that,
And hold on to the things that are working. It's not like just blowing everything.
Fitodi, did you have a final thought there?
Can we advertise this better and more? Because we should know about this. I'm shocked, surprised, in a good way that this is happening. Everybody should know about this. We should, is there an internet experience or presence that, and if so, should someone be on that who can get the word out?
Yeah, I mean we're trying. The Tulsa World has covered it fairly well. They've done a couple of stories, not in a while. But our team is also, we have a great team. They make these little videos, and so again, social media is a great way. So my social media, you don't have to be my friend. It's all public. So social media, the Tulsa Public Schools Facebook page, Twitter, both Tulsa Public Schools and my Twitter account are also great ways to see these little videos. And then our website is getting better and better as well. But I'm glad you said that. And Bracken and I will take that back and see maybe there's more that we can do to get that word out. But it is exciting.
Lots of great stuff. Okay, Naja, would you like to close us out with the poem that you have for
Oh,
us?
sure. I need to grab my phone real fast.
Sure, yeah. While she's grabbing that, I just want to thank once again the Woody Guthrie Center and Jerry as he walks in the back. Also the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, Tri-City Collective, Creation Lansana, who also snuck in the back there, for putting things on like this and curating such events. And then our panel who showed up today, and you folks as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for all being here. Okay, so I actually wrote this in February of 16, and they told me I should get it copyrighted and like spread it out for all the teachers. And I have terrible follow through, so that didn't happen. But maybe if somebody has an in, then this can happen. Okay, so it's called Tools in a Superhero's Backpack, and forgive me for not having it memorized. That's not how I usually perform, so don't tell anybody. It says, these are tools in a superhero's backpack. 5 number 2 lead pencils, 2 big pens in black, 2 in blue, 1 in red, a yellow highlighter, a pocket folder with approximately 15 sheets of college ruled paper, 15 sheets of wide, 15 pieces of blank copy paper, and a bookmark. You never know if you'll need to write something down, whether it can be erased or it should be permanent, whether you'll need to make a word more prominent, whether you'll have to start over, whether you'll have to start over 10 times, whether you'll need all the space you can find, or whether the bigger you write, the bolder your point, whether you'll need to draw a diagram instead of spelling it out, whether you'll need to save your place. Tools in a superhero's backpack. A travel-sized packet of Kleenex. The whole box would be better, but you've got to conserve space. A travel bottle of hand sanitizer. We all know that it gets messy. And there are no sinks in the trenches. A comb or a brush, a ponytail holder or a tube of lipstick, a baseball cap or a hoodie, whatever makes you feel easier to look at. Tools more comfortable than the ones you're wearing. Shoes more comfortable than the ones you're wearing. Some days the stairs are a lot higher, the road to right is longer, the obstacles have thorns, and there is no time to run home. Tools in a superhero's backpack. A power bar or your choice of an on-the-go snack. Sometimes a come to Jesus trumps lunch. Last night's victory was won after bedtime. Tomorrow's victory requires working past dinner. Pack a whole box. Drink from the water bottle sparingly. Map out all of the stops. Superheroes don't take restroom breaks. Leave one pocket empty for the feelings and thoughts you can't share. Leave one pocket empty for the tears you would cry with more time. Leave one pocket empty for every reason and rhyme, every excuse and lie that doesn't bring you closer to the goal. Tools in a superhero's backpack. An outdated textbook, a laptop that only switches on half the time, a dry erase marker on its last leg, an iPad you bought with your own money, a rubric that answers questions no one will think to ask, a manual on handling angry parents. Don't pack a cape. Those are for movies and mutants and fiction. Leave your alter ego. You are the one who was chosen. No telephone booths or spider bites, just the strength that possessed you to get this far in the first place. Don't forget, a framed copy of the Serenity Prayer. The difference between an attitude I can't change and a knowledge gap I can tackle with some courage, pack that, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you.
You're dismissed, I guess. School's out? Yeah, school's out.
I know you will. I did?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting.
Tony and Nasha, can you get a picture of everybody?
Yeah, absolutely.
They really are.
Well, yeah. Okay, so people always say they're gonna send them, but also
I will, it's on my phone.
like today.
I have it over.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they for each other. It's a good sign. Well, you know what? There's oh my gosh. Great. It's been so long. I'm doing really well. Look at me. Oh, thank you. Oh, it just fills my heart to see you. Yeah. That's great.
Get all the angles.
Well, it's necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important.
I would
Word
do a
is
Tell me
selfie.
about this. So you're not gonna be working at home?
Okay, let's get away from these scary lights.
Yeah, next time I see you, let's talk about it. I'm interested.
No, that's good. I like
Good to
how
see you.
I was taking a selfie.
Okay, ready?
Get right here.
There you go.
I was like, wait a second.
There you go, perfect.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
And let me get with Jerry. I think you guys have a stipend coming your way. Speaking of teacherly things.
There you go.
So, Dr. Gustaf, all of oh, sorry, go ahead. We have to recommend. Yes.
That was a wonderful
Thank you.
Yes, you should. You know what? I'm staying on.
I like this picture of you doing your poem.
Yes, oh, that is
Can I send it to you?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Quickly, I always feel like I have to go to places like with a buddy so that they can be my photographer in real time.
Yeah, what's your number?
405. Why am I saying that? 549.
I'm so happy to know
549-099.
Yeah, I hope we can stay in touch. Yes.
Have you thought
The,
about Tulsa Teacher Corps?
White table right when you walk out of this room to the
Yeah.
left. Jerry's there with W9s.
Okay.
So yeah.
Here I go.
Thank you for coming in clutch with that poem at the end. Sorry about the confusion.
Oh no, it's not.
But I appreciate
So when I was like frustrated, it's not like this is Josh's fault. I just feel like we don't always like work as a team. And like we could have all done
I don't know if it's been mentioned, but I'm stepping away.
I just talked to him earlier, and I'm sad, but I'm excited for like all the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, just busy with.
So are you gonna still be in the classroom, or are you?
I'm not in the classroom.
Okay, you're only doing the mentorship.
Yeah, only doing the mentorship. But it is. I went from one side to 3, so now I have like 45 teachers.
That's a lot.
So yeah, and I'm still adjuncting at TCC too. And then with all the little ones and whatnot, it's just like I need to-
absolutely. Like with a baby.
Yeah, but you know,
New baby.
so
Plus,
You didn't?
so is it 4 total or 5
4
total?
total.
4 total.
Yeah.
They have a
Yeah,
government,
no,
so they
you
have a mayor,
have
and
a
a
lot
city
on your plate, and
council.
fully understand. Maybe, you know, in a year or 2 or 3.
maybe things will calm down. Yeah. And part of the reason I'm stepping down is so I can write more because I just found myself doing so much admin.
You have to apply
Of
for
course.
stuff, once you get your job, you get paid.
I do.
You know.
I do know.
So I was like,
And
I
then
need to
you
make
have,
some me time.
you get your paycheck and then you can
Your
go
time is
spend it.
important.
Comedy.
Because without it, you won't.
Businesses,
Yeah.
Like, you lose all your passion.
Right, exactly.
cookies, like one of the stores.
We're about to. We need to take care of a few things, and then we can. I appreciate your patience. You were so good.
You were
You earned your treat.
No, it's just you were so good.
We're gonna go to Antoinette's Bakery, and you can pick anything you want there. Antoinette's Bakery, they have pie, they have brownies, cookies. You can pick one of anything.
So you said that.
You are doing something
For today.
I know, you're right, you're so right about that.
I think that was for yesterday, maybe.
You're so right about that.
Possibly.
Very good. I
Did you
would
meet
love
Bracken?
to, I know you're in
Bracken?
the city, but I would love to
Bracken?
stay in touch.
Sure.
Social
So
media or email or
is
whatever.
Asocia Carlson still?
No,
Okay.
she was in the design lab.
Okay.
But
I thought I'd seen
she's going
Tulsa
to be,
Beyond.
yes,
Okay.
you're exactly right. That's exactly what she did while she was here.
Yeah.
She's going to be a superintendent.
Really?
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
That's
of a
awesome.
small district in Arizona.
That's
Wow,
right.
that's
Yeah,
good for
so
her.
that was obviously a big opportunity for her.
Yeah,
so
of
we were
course.
sad for her to go, but yeah. Did
So
you
she-
teach in her school?
Yeah, so it was funny because she hired me, but then she resigned, and I went to that school. And then and I actually found her through Poetry League, so that's interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, like she's always doing a lot of good things. I will get with. Yeah, we're all on the email from Josh. I'll send you an email.
You're right.
And
You're right. Okay.
introduce myself. So
Okay.
we can, yeah, definitely have more conversations about things. They keep telling me to move here, but I feel like I feel like I can't move to Tulsa for the same reason I can't move to Texas. Like I've got to. If Tulsa's doing all these fantastic things, yes. So now who's gonna do that in Oklahoma City? You know, and now who's gonna?
So, I mean, we're not getting it done.
We gotta.
We're not getting it
Let's
done.
do the math and figure out who's got more needs. I don't know. Oklahoma City is.
I don't
Are you guys about to close 14 schools?
We have closed a whole bunch of them, and we have a $20 million deficit for this